All right, so today we are going to talk about our 1.1 vocabulary, and we're actually starting forces and energies. So that's why suddenly our numbers reset from 4, which we just finished, down to 1, because we're moving on to a new book, we're moving on to a new unit. Before this, we focused on science and technology, really what is science, how do we do it, and now we're going to focus on forces and energy, a piece of science, and applying those concepts. So you'll see some things you already know, or maybe we've mentioned. Now we're going to look at a little more detail at some of those things. So that first word we're going to look at is motion. Now you know what motion is. You know, if people have talked about motion. Oh, well, that object's in motion. Well, how do we define what motion is? Well, in science and physics, we define, so our definition is the state in which an object's distance from another is changing. So when we say the state, so what this means right here, so the state at which an object changes, a real formal way of saying basically we are now in the state in which we're in is changing. So we're no longer stationary, we are now moving, right? So we're in a different state. Our example here is, so when bowling, the bowling ball is in motion as it travels down the lane. So many of you have probably gotten bowling, I'm assuming here, and so if we bowl, and so we throw our bowling ball and it's going to move, and that's kind of what this is showing. So no, there's not actually 4 separate bowling balls here moving, but they're showing that it's not moving that distance. So the state in which this bowling ball is changing, so looking at that definition, the state in which one object's distance from another is changing, is basically saying, okay, so now this bowling ball was here, the state was it was close to this bowler, and now the state of it is changing as it's getting further and further away. That distance is increasing, which we'll actually talk about. Next word that we're going to talk about here is reference point. Now, this is really important when determining distance. So looking at reference point, our definition again is a place or object used for comparison to determine if an object is in motion. So our example, so objects that are not moving make good reference points, such as a tree or a building. So with the reference point, we want it to be stationary. If it's moving, it can be really, really hard to actually tell the true motion of an object, and ultimately their speed and velocity, which we'll cover in later chapters. So that's why I just have a nice little image here of a tree, because typically trees aren't getting up and moving unless we're in Lord of the Rings. Then we have ants that are moving around. But of course, in our known world, trees aren't moving, at least very quickly, right? So they make a good reference point. Or if you're standing still and you're not moving, you'd be a good reference point. So there's plenty of great reference points. The key thing that they would all have in common is they're not moving, they are stationary. So a non-example, something that wouldn't be a good reference point, would be a car that's moving, or maybe your bus on your way into school. You're moving, that's not the best reference point. Our next word should look familiar, and that's because it's the International System of Units. And now this is something we talked about in our past units on our metric system. And that's because the International System of Units are sometimes referred to as the SI. Okay, so sometimes that's what it's referred to. So if you've maybe seen it written as the SI, let's make that capital I, then that is the same thing. So our definition is going to be a system of units used by scientists to measure the properties of matter. So if you forgot, didn't quite remember, there's the definition for you. It's a specific version of the metric system is basically what it is. So an example, or really purpose behind it, is a system of measurement that allows scientists to compare data and communicate their results. So it's a common language, a common way to report our findings. Again, it makes things really, really easy, because if I just say, oh, well, we have 5 of them, I have no idea what we mean. We need to label that. If you say 5, then all right, for all I know, we have 5 bananas, right? It's also important that it's a standard type of measurement, in the sense that it's not 5 finger lengths, because that doesn't tell me a whole lot, because are we talking what sort of finger lengths? Are we talking short finger lengths? Are we talking long finger lengths, as far as, some fingers longer than others? And so we need a little more of those details. And so for here, this the image example, I have a table of isomer prefixes that we could use, and that's really important because that is a common way of reporting. Okay, so if I see centi in front of one of our common measurements, I know this is the factor in which is the size of it. So it's a really easy way to tell, okay, so if I have a centimeter, I know I have 100th of a meter. And so that helps with that a lot. Now the final one is a word I am sure you've used regularly and you know, and that's going to be distance. And I've already even mentioned in this video, definition meaning the length of the path between 2 points. So our example is you travel a distance when you come to school each day. You travel a distance all the time. Basically, if you change your location at any point, you're traveling a distance. Now later we'll talk about something called displacement and how that is technically different, although they can be the same. So we'll talk about that. Right now you don't need to worry about it. Right now we just need to focus on our word here, distance. And for image, it's just kind of nice and simple. We basically have a point here and we have a point here. If it's easier for you to think about it, we could also think of this as like point. We could think of it as point A, and we can think of it as point B, and we are traveling that distance.